Welcome to this special series for the Docs with Disabilities podcast, part of the Disability Resource Hub, a project made possible through funding from the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation Catalyst Award for Transformation in Graduate Medical Education. This initiative is a collaboration between the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education and the Docs with Disabilities Initiative, designed to promote disability accessibility across residency and fellowship training. Throughout this series, you'll hear from residents, fellows, program directors, researchers, and national leaders, each offering insight into what it means to create access in clinical learning environments. Together with program directors, we'll explore how programs can better support residents with disabilities. In addition to these powerful conversations, we've created a full library of resources for graduate medical education available in Learn at ACGME. You can find the link to the hub in the show notes, and we hope you'll explore and share these resources widely. We're so glad you're here, so let's get started.
My name is Emily Green, and I am a child psychiatrist at University of Chicago. I just finished my fellowship in child and adolescent psychiatry at UIC, and I have always wanted to be a physician. I have ADHD and a reading disability, and learning about that, getting medication for that, getting therapy for that is what really pushed me to want to be a physician, because I wanted to be that change for other kids.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Volpe, and I'll call you Kelley from here on out, could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your program's philosophy and your approach to DEI?
So hi, my name is Kelley Volpe, and I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I am currently the training director of our Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Fellowship program at the University of Illinois in Chicago, and I have been for the past 7 years, and it is also the program that I trained in. Diversity and inclusion and equity are central parts of the mission of our program, not just educationally, but also in our clinical work. So it's something that we really mindfully try to apply across the board when we're working with trainees and patients and families and colleagues. We tend to have a pretty active approach to this, and it's something that we put in the front of our minds when we're looking at how are we recruiting people, how are we building educational opportunities, and how are we working with trainees that we hire.
Wonderful. Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about the process of matching to fellowship, because this is where we get 99% of the questions from learners or people that are about to head into, whether it be residency match or fellowship match. And I do want to say a lot of this information is in your article, and I encourage people to read your article in Academic Medicine. But when thinking about going through that process, it's such a major moment. How did your disability, Emily, factor into your considerations or your decision-making? One, when you were choosing where to apply, because you were coming from out of state, and so that might have had something to do with it. But two, when you looked at programs and thinking about how to rank programs and where to apply, what role did disability play in that?
Disability played a major role for me because it was so difficult with matching for regular residency. I did not want to go out of state, but this is how the match occurred for me. So it was very important for me to come back to Illinois first and foremost. These are the same programs that I had applied to for regular residency. And a big piece that was honestly just going through the back of my mind the entire time was this the reason why they didn't pick me the first time? Was it because of the disability?
That breaks my heart. Oh, I don't think you've ever said it in quite that way. That just hit me, that reflection of, was this why?
Oh my gosh, no, that was my thought for months and months. The other thought was, are these places interested in me now because I finally proved myself by getting through regular residency? And so now they're like, oh, we would like to interview you. And, in the back of my mind, I was like, well, you didn't seem that interested in me last time because you didn't pick me. So that was a huge piece for me. Was it because I was pregnant when I was matching for regular psychiatry residency? Is it because I'm Black? Is it because I'm disabled? Is it because I'm openly disabled? There were so many things going through my head because I did not match in my top 5 for regular psych residency. It was just like, okay, am I going to have that same issue again where I think that these places are interested in me, but they actually in the end are not? So that was huge. I knew Dr. Volpe before my interviews for fellowship, and I knew that she was understanding, that she was inclusive. That played a huge role for me, was knowing that this was a program director who was going to allow me to be my true self, including being openly disabled. Another big thing was just how the program views disability in terms of what are they specializing in, like what kinds of patients do they have? And UIC had a majority of African American and other underrepresented minorities as patients. And it was very important to me as a Black psychiatrist to have Black patients because almost always I was the first Black physician, unfortunately, that they had seen. And so that was also a really big piece for me. And then the disability part, again, was really big because every time that I met with a kid, especially the Black girls, I would tell them, I have the same disability as you, and it says MD at the end of my name. And that was really important for me to be able to be at a place that was going to allow me to do that and to see how big of a difference it made for these kids, because it did. So looking at UIC, looking at the other places in Chicago, I felt comfortable going to UIC. I felt like I could be myself. Felt like I could be my true self, both with racial differences and also with ability differences.
It's really powerful. And I'm sure as well for your clients and patients to be able to see that the disability is not going to keep them from excelling in a career that they would choose. And they might not otherwise get that. And I think that's incredibly important. Thank you so much for sharing. Kelley, from your perspective, and you've obviously heard Emily say how frightened she was to be kind of out about her disability, thinking that that may have, among a number of other factors that were going on in her life and other demographic factors, that people might be biased against matching her to the program. What was it about your program that made it a good match for Emily, and why did the program rank Emily so high? What were the qualities that made Emily an amazing match for UIC?
We don't have that much time to go through all of the qualities.
Love it. I love it.
UIC, like Emily mentioned, we at UIC and in our program, the core part of our mission is to work with underserved individuals in the community and to train psychiatrists in the academic setting. And that's how we do our recruitment. When I was a fellow and the associate training director, our program director had been a child psychiatry program director for decades. And she was always just so confident that no matter what applicant we had or anything that they might be, struggling with or not struggling with, that we could help support them. And this was a place where anyone could come and be part of our fellowship and kind of grow into the best physician that they could be, really meeting people where they're at. And so that is something that she really impressed upon me, something that I really tried to continue when I was the training director. And we have a very small and close-knit faculty. And a couple of years after I started being training director, we all sat down and came up with how we want to recruit fellows and what are the things that we're looking for with fellows. And we discussed, what are the things that we value in trainees and how will they fit with our mission. And we identified, I think, 5 areas. One being that they're really interested in working with our patient population, that they're really interested in academics, that they have good communication skills, want to be part of a team that works together, and also are really interested and supporting of the diversity and inclusion concepts and programs and really will work with us on that mission. And so whenever we're recruiting candidates and looking through applications. Those are the things that we look for. And that's how we knew that Emily would be a great fit, because she is passionate about education and diversity, inclusion, and working with underserved populations. And it was very clear that she would really be a wonderful part of our community. When it comes to reviewing applications and thinking about disabilities or demographic factors or anything that might be an alteration in, what might be the typical training course, really how I think about that and how our faculty think about that is we tend to have an understanding that the applicant, the resident, has really put into a lot of thought what they are going to disclose, what they're not going to disclose. And it's something that they think about when they're putting together this application. And it's something that they think about in the context of the difficulties that have been on their path along the way, going to medical school, getting into residency. We know that whole process is fraught with people who really are looking superficially and not taking somebody as a whole person. And so when we're engaging with our interviews, we really follow their lead, how they want to talk about these topics, how we want to support them in the ways that we can support them, answering all the questions that they need to know. It's not something that we factor into our decision when we're ranking candidates. And I always just come back to my old program director and Dr. Kelley and know confidently that as a program, when we match someone who is passionate about our mission, we will be able to work with them and help them become even more amazing doctor than they already are.
Thank you so much. It's clear our audience, our listeners won't be able to see the looks on your faces, but I love, Kelley, that you light up when I ask that question. It's very clear that you have a lot of admiration and respect for Dr. Green. Emily, I'm going to come back to you. Transitioning to residency or fellowship it's a lot. It's a lot. It's very challenging for anyone. And as I mentioned before, you were crossing state lines. The good news is you were coming home, but that process is time intensive. You have to fill out a bunch of paperwork. You have to figure out the nuance of the new program. Can you describe some of the challenges that you had with regard to your disability when you were coming into this fellowship?
So I didn't have a lot of issues in coming in, and that was actually one of the issues. So it wasn't about the program itself. It wasn't about child and adolescent psychiatry. It was about UIC's disability inclusion program. So I went to UIC for medical school. And so as I was coming back, it was just like, I know exactly what to do. I know exactly who to talk to. I know the entire process. There's going to be no issue. And Dr. Volpe knew about it. I was very open with my other supervisors. And so it seemed like it was going to be a very smooth transition. So the supervisors at UIC, including Dr. Volpe, were like, you don't have to do accommodations if you don't want to, because of course that is on paper. They were just like, we will work with you with whatever you need. But because I am taking boards, because there were other things that were going to come up in the future, it was like, no, I do want to do the whole process because it's very important to have a paper trail.
You also knew that because you had accommodations back all the way through high school. And so you were not a new consumer of this service.
No.
Exactly what you needed to do. You had a really good experience in residency.
And I had a good experience in medical school as well with UIC. And so it took a while before with medical school, but I got it done and I felt supported. But when I transitioned to fellowship, I just assumed that it was going to be that easy. But because I was now a resident/fellow and not a medical student, we find out later, as I'm actually trying to give them the paperwork, the official paperwork, that it's a whole new office and it's a whole new process. And it's none of the people that I worked with before. And it was like, oh no, all of these issues started to come up. So in the beginning, I didn't even think about it because it was just like, I've done this before. I've done this with UIC as an institution. It will be great. It'll be fine. Dr. Volpe is amazing. She's very supportive. She's going to sign all the paperwork that I need her to. It's going to be fine. And then it was like, wait, what is this? And what I realized when I was actually doing the paperwork, because I didn't do that in the very beginning of the program, I waited a little bit just to see. The other reason why I waited a little bit is, and I really want listeners to know this, is that you don't know what you need accommodations for until you actually have the job. Like, there's no way. And I really hate that people will say, well, what do you need? I have no idea. I've never been a child fellow. I don't know what I need. And so I took a couple of months to figure out, how long is it taking for me to do this? How long is it taking for me to do that? And so I was very specific with my accommodation requests. I specifically asked for extra time for inpatient intakes, not outpatient, because outpatient intakes I could work with, but inpatient ones were much more time intensive, and there was a shorter period of time that they needed to be done. So I realized what I needed, and they pretty much reflected the accommodations that I had gotten in residency. So when I sent them my paperwork, they said that we can't accept this because it was not an MD. It was the PhD who did my neuropsych evaluation. And I tried to explain to them over email, because I never got anyone's actual contact number, but just that this is what you need. It's not an MD who can actually diagnose me with a learning disability. And I know that because I'm a physician and I'm a psychiatrist. Like, I know that this is actually the right process. And so it was very frustrating for people to say, no, I need it to be an MD. And so I said, okay, fine. I got my MD to do it. When it did finally go through, they said, okay, that's fine, but it's going to be discretionary, meaning that it's at the discretion of your supervisor whether or not they're going to give you these accommodations. And that's when I feel like my whole world just kind of shattered, where it was just like, wait a second, this doesn't say ADA on it. I've never had this issue in the last 8 years of doing this. Like, what in the world is going on? And that's where Dr. Volpe really came in and had to do some serious digging to try to figure out, why is Emily having so many issues where she didn't in our institution only 4 years ago. And so in the beginning, honestly, I didn't think there was going to be a problem. It really seemed like it was going to be streamlined and it was going to be super easy. But when we got into the weeds of it, it was just like, no, this is a whole different ballgame. This is you as a resident. You're kind of a student. You're kind of a staff member. And it was just super confusing. And I don't know if I would have been able to actually get the full accommodations if Dr. Volpe hadn't stepped up as she did.
You know, it's funny, Emily, because in the supplement, the academic medicine supplement, there's themes across all of the papers. And one of the themes was this transition from UME to GME being a place where people get lost and have a really difficult time. It's like they had this map, they had the support in UME, and then they get to GME. Everything kind of happens behind this very opaque black box, and you don't really know what's going on. And it seems like institutionally, people don't even know what's going on, right? It's almost like a hot potato situation. No, they're yours. No, they're yours. No, they're yours. And it's interesting. I don't think you know this, so I get to tell you live, but I can't wait for you to see the cover of the supplement. And it's in part a nod. I did all these almost little love letters to people in the way that I developed the cover art. But on the cover is a woman of color going down a hospital corridor, and one of the signs says human resources. And it's this nod to a lot of women who were authors in the supplement, but it's also a nod to the theme that arose throughout the papers, which was GME is a nightmare. You kind of get planted in the hospital and you try to figure out what's happening with HR. And in defense of HR, they were not prepared for this. They're not trained for this. They don't understand. So we uncovered, I think, in the papers that are in the supplement, some real issues with that transition. Thank God for Kelley, because I know, Kelley, you did it took a lot of extra follow-up on your part as the program director to figure out what that roadmap was, right? How did you work with the GME offices or the disability services offices? In what way did that kind of unfold for you?
Emily was the first fellow that I had the opportunity to work with her and the GME office to request accommodations for disability. And we've had lots of different types of accommodations or different paths that our fellows have taken to completing the program. So that was not new to me. And I had known the basic concepts of working with the GME office and figuring out the rules. The approach that I had typically taken with the transition from residency to fellowship is the idea that we can handle things as they come up. Like Emily said, that you don't often know what sort of accommodations or support or what is needed when you're first starting fellowship because you've never been a fellow before. And the same thing on our end is, every fellow that comes to our program is a different individual with their own different approach to learning and life. And so we can work together to sort of figure out what the needs are. One thing that I did kind of learn from working with GME and the university on this is it can help to be a little proactive. And for that, I'm meaning just specifically with ensuring that the fellows have the support that they need, the documentation that they need in order to get the outcomes that they need. Like Emily had mentioned with the test, having the appropriate materials and paperwork to apply for accommodations. One of the things that is really great about our department is we really work closely together and we really have created a supportive and inclusive environment that tends to go very smoothly. And there's also an entire world and university around us that have their own policies and procedures and ways for handling things. So I think it's really helpful to be aware of that and be just maybe a little bit more proactive than I was.
You said this is the first time you've worked with a resident, and I know that a lot of PDs, that's one of their big questions is how is it going to impact the program? I imagine that there were ways that it was a really good impact, and I can't really imagine any challenges, but I wonder if there were some that we are not thinking about.
There were a lot of good impacts. There really weren't that many challenges. I think most of the challenges, and unfortunately this is likely true for anyone with a disability, most of the challenges kind of fell on to Emily with having to, send repeated emails and update paperwork and work with the different offices and just navigate this process. I would say that the impact on the program was very positive because we got to work through this and navigate this with Emily, and it will absolutely help us as we work with fellows in the future who need accommodations. One of the really most positive ways that it impacted our program is we have been really working to be explicit about our support of diversity and equity and inclusion. And this is one way that we are now being mindful of ways to be more explicit and let people know that we can work with them for accommodations. And so that was really great. I think another really positive aspect it had on the program is it gave us the opportunity to look at not just Emily's needs, but all of the fellows' needs on the different rotations and really just keep us reaffirming that we're creating that environment that is a balance between clinical services and education functioning. Like Emily mentioned, fellows fall on the spectrum between being a student and a learner and being an employee. And it really does take frequent surveillance to make sure that that balance is being met.
One of the biggest issues that came up was that I was the first person that needed to prove that I had a disability. In thinking about the previous fellows that I know needed some kind of accommodation in the program, it was almost always something that was temporary. There was someone who was sick. There was someone who was pregnant. It was things where it was like, we're going to do this for you at this time, and then we're going to get back into the regular swing of things. And for me, it was like, no, this is this is not going away. And I need to have it on paper that it's not going away and that I still need to have these accommodations because it's going to come up in the future. And so I feel like that's also something that people don't seem to understand, that a learning disability is a chronic illness. Obviously, I was able to get a lot done. Obviously, I am able to articulate myself better. I'm able to get my assignments done quicker than I did 25 years ago, but I still have the disability. And so I think that that's one of the biggest issues, is that sometimes people would act as though it's something that is temporary, and it's not. And so even when I was talking with the office that was going to give me the accommodations, they were so focused on an MD and so focused on it being like a broken leg or needing a wheelchair temporarily, where it's like, no, this is something that's chronic, and it's something that I need it to be on paper that this is something I need because I may need it in the future. And so I think that that's what I would want to tell program directors, is that has been my experience, is that a lot of people, they know how to do temporary accommodations, but they don't understand what people with an actual disability need, and that it's different.
I think that's such a really important point, Emily, especially in the context of GME, because in all of our GME programs, we're not just preparing someone to be a good doctor when they graduate, we're also preparing someone to be a good doctor 5 years from now and 10 years from now and 20 years from now. So if there's a chronic disability, really being able to create an environment where someone can learn, and develop their professional identity in the context of the disability or accommodations or anything that they need, so that they can continue on incorporating that into their professional identity throughout their career.
I agree 100%. And thank you, Emily, for giving more detail around that. I also want to point out that what happened to you is completely incorrect. And the kind of doubling down on the need for documentation to come from a physician, I find quite interesting, because diagnostically, that would not be the clinician that would have not even qualified to make those diagnoses or speak to the functional impairment that would result from the learning disability, perhaps from the ADHD, but not from the learning disability. So I find it really interesting that there was just a doubling down on that. And thank goodness, one thing we haven't talked about, we've talked about all the challenges that you've had, but there's also a level of privilege there, being a physician, understanding this, and having kind of that historical experience to draw on, because you knew someone, your treating physician, where you could say, this doesn't make any sense to me, it's not going to make any sense to you, but I really need you to write this letter. And I'm sure that there was a lot of support on your end to the physician writing that letter. So in some ways, it allowed you to navigate the environment better than someone who is not an MD. So I think about all the people going through this who wouldn't know the difference or wouldn't have the confidence and understanding that this was wrong, yet this clearly isn't going to change. So I'm going to need to navigate it somehow and get someone to write this letter.
Yeah, that was huge. I definitely could realize that this person was not going to go any further with my request unless I had an MD write it out. And so because my doctor knew about my disability, and the same place that I got my neuropsychological testing is the same place that I get my primary care, I was very easily able to say, hey, can you write this letter? Here's the supporting information. Here is my neuropsych evaluation, so that you can tell I am not adding anything. I am just putting it into words for you, but this is what I need it to come from my physician. And they did that for me. I don't know what it would have looked like, though, if I had been with a new provider, if this had been me transitioning instead of from Wisconsin back to Illinois, if it was Illinois to Wisconsin. I mean, I had to have a new physician when I went to Wisconsin, but coming back to Illinois, I was able to go back to my old physician who knew that I had a long history of disability. And so there were a lot of factors that played into me being able to do this, not only with my previous understanding, but also because I was coming to a provider who knew me very well, knew that I wasn't trying to get ahead of the system or something like that. Because that's the other problem, is that sometimes even us as physicians will be very careful about writing things because maybe this person really doesn't need it. Are they just asking for this to get ahead? They actually knew that I had a history of it. But if it had been someone else, they really might have said, I'm sorry, I can't do this because I don't know your disability. So I think there were a lot of factors that played into it.
I want to switch to talking about the benefits and the experience of the fellowship training. Emily, for you, looking back, what are you most proud of during the fellowship? And in what way do you think your identity as a disabled person really shaped that journey?
I think that the biggest thing was being able to participate in Illinois LEND, which focuses on neurodevelopmental disorders and is a completely different, separate program, but it is for people that are advocates, who are self-advocates, who are physicians, who are family members of those who are disabled, but it was a very big program that UIC offers, and I was able to participate in it because my fellowship allowed it and because they knew that this was going to make me a better physician. And so that was a huge piece, was being able to do extra work and understanding neurodevelopmental disorders, including my own. And I wouldn't have been able to do that at every single program. Dr. Volpe really had to move around a couple of things in order for this to work out. I know that doing LEND made me a better physician because I not only understood the actual diseases better, but also the resources that are available. And so I was able to dive in even more into my passion, which is neurodevelopmental disorders, because I was at UIC and because they saw my passion and said, we're going to make sure that you can do everything that you want to do in this because we know it's going to make you better. And so I think that that would be the biggest piece, was not only being able to do that, but being in a program that understood that this was important to me and would be important to the work that I did with my patients.
That's amazing. And great shout out for the LEND program. I have had several people tell me that it was just such a formative and positive experience for them being part of that program. So it's so great to get a shout out to them. And we'll be sure to put a link to that program in the show notes. Kelley, going back to you, you talked a lot about what the program gained as part of having Emily in the program. And I wonder, again, going back to the frequently asked questions of program directors, they're afraid. They're very fearful, especially those that have never done it. But you've done it now, and this was your first experience. What advice would you give to other program directors about supporting fellows, and I'll add residents to that, supporting residents or fellows, so someone in the GME sphere with disabilities? What advice would you give them to reduce that kind of fear that many will have?
I will say that me as a human being, lucked out by having Emily as part of our program and part of my life. And I don't know that everyone will always have the opportunity to work with a trainee who is so well versed in how you get accommodations and what are the legal guidelines around it. And she has taught me so much, and it's really put me in a place that I can be a better advocate for the trainees that come into our program. And I think that's really the biggest piece of advice that I would give to other program directors, is to have a familiarity with each individual program, have a familiarity with the GME personnel so that you can ask questions, know the processes that people have to go through so that we can be that advocate for the learners. And that's really the program director's role, is to help the residents and fellows navigate all of these, the institution and the ACGME and GME and the boards and all of those bureaucratic things. And this is really another place that we have the opportunity to be great advocates for our trainees.
Absolutely. Emily, I'm going to send the same question almost back to you. What advice, and I know you've dropped a few little pearls of wisdom in the talk already, but what advice in general would you give to residents and fellows with disabilities as they navigate the match process?
Oh, that's a hard one. You said the match process. I was thinking the fellowship or residency itself, but the match process is difficult. Not everyone is going to want to reveal their disability, and I completely understand that and respect that. But sometimes you get into a place where there is no alternative. For some people, and I do have friends who have disabilities where it's just like, I don't have to mention it. It might be a little bit more painful for me to do this literally physically, or this is going to take a little bit more time, but it's okay. I can get through it. And I'm one of those people where, unfortunately, it can become overwhelming to the point where I do need to have accommodations. And so I think you need to know yourself, and you need to know what you can and cannot do. If you are really big on, I don't want to have to reveal this, I don't want to do this, and you don't have to, awesome, that's great. But if you are in a place where I can't get through this exam without accommodations, or I need to have a special chair, I can't do this without these things, you need to be upfront during that match process, because the worst thing would be hiding this and then finding out that you matched at a place that was not welcoming. And I actually talked about this with a friend who was thinking of getting pregnant. And she said, well, I don't know if I should actually get pregnant this time, because then that means that I'll be showing during interviews. This is in 2019 when we were still doing interviews in person. And I told her, I said, okay, but let's say that you go to a place and you don't mention that you want to have kids soon. You're not pregnant, you're not showing. And then you become pregnant and then you're at that program and they actually are not accepting and they make it really hard for you to get through. That would be awful. What if we're just open and honest and you say, I want to have kids soon, or you are openly pregnant during that time? You know, you can tell how people are responding to you. And so it takes a lot of courage. I am not saying that this is for everyone, but you just don't want to end up at a place where actually they are not understanding and may even make it harder for you to get through the program once they find out that you have a disability. And so I think you have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. You seemed so disappointed when I didn't ask you about the in-residency experience. Do you want to give some advice for people that are in the residency?
I think it's actually the same advice now that I think about it, which is just that you have to speak up if you're having issues. We are taught as people who are in pre-med, who are in med school, you have to be the best of the best and you just grit your teeth and you get through it. But you can only do that for so long. And so I have found that when I was honest about what I needed and I was specific about what I needed, not like, oh, I'm so overwhelmed, I can't do this. But when I say things like, I'm going to need an extra half an hour to do this. A friend of mine who has a physical disability, I'm going to need to have a chair during rounds. When you can tell them what you specifically need, I think that people are much more understanding because you take out the guesswork for them of them being like, okay, well, what does that mean? What do I have to do as a program director, as a coordinator? Like, what are you saying I have to change about the space? Being open and honest, but also very specific is super helpful because then they can say, okay, Emily has an hour and a half with this patient because of her accommodations. And I can do that because I can schedule it instead of having to think about, well, is that 2 hours? Is that 2.5 hours? I can't give you 2.5 hours. So knowing what you need and being upfront and honest about it is super helpful. And I think that you'll find that people are more understanding when they clearly understand what you need. And that actually is up to you in communicating that clearly and stating, this is what I need. It's going to be truly helpful.
I think that's excellent, excellent advice. And I really appreciate both of you giving this because, it can come from me, it can come from policy reviews or papers, but hearing it directly from the program director and the learner is just so much more powerful. Thinking about the advice you give, is there anything else you think that we haven't covered, things that you would want the audience or the listener to know? Again, we want them to go and read that paper. It has a lot of really good information in it, outlines of what you did, Emily. And one thing I love about your case study and a lot of the case studies is that it gives the history too, because we know that for people that have had that experience in getting accommodations, it's a little bit different from those that are newly diagnosed when they get into medicine. And the new diagnosis makes up about 50% of the learners that we see. So having that kind of bigger contextualization is really, really helpful for the reader. So again, I encourage people to go. It's Green and Volpe 2025 Academic Medicine, and to read the full article. But is there anything else that you think you would want to share with the listeners?
I think that for me, this is something completely different than what we have previously talked about. It wasn't until fellowship that I understood how important it was for me to discuss my disability, not with all of my patients, but with a lot of my patients because of my patient population. There are these kids that are looking up to us who want to do pre-med, who want to do these things, and it changes them when they see that there are doctors with disabilities. I think about when I was in medical school, I got sick. I just had like a bad cold or something like that. And my niece, who was very young at the time, said, I thought that doctors couldn't get sick. I said, oh my gosh, sweetheart, no, that's not true. But we do have this personification of, godlike status as a doctor. And it's so important, and it's so helpful to show that, no, we get sick, we have disabilities, and we can keep on being doctors. And so I would say that for those who are not really sure about it, it has truly changed my interaction with patients. It has truly helped a couple of them, especially those who are a little bit older who have ADHD and disabilities, to see that and to feel confident in themselves again. And so I think that the biggest thing is just, it's okay for us to be who we are. I know that not everyone is going to be understanding, and that is very true. But for those who you could see that might help them, I think it's okay to say things like, I have ADHD, I have diabetes. You see that I'm in a wheelchair, I can do these things. It's important to say that and to really give voice to the fact that we are a diverse group of people. We're not just all superheroes. And if we are, we're superheroes with a cane or with a disability. And it's really important for especially the younger ones to see that.
I love everything that you said, Emily. And I think it's so important. I love especially when you said you can be a doctor, right? I think you're right. I think the kind of overwhelming narrative about physicians is that you have to be perfect and you can never be sick and you can never take time away. And doctors are humans. And the fact that you can be a physician, you can be a person with a disability, and you can thrive in that role is really important. And it's a narrative that we need to keep putting out there, because there are so many false assumptions about what it takes to be a physician. So I really appreciate it. And certainly your case study helps add to that. And Emily, I also want to bring up that you were interviewed by Dr. Nara Jain a few years ago on the podcast. And so your personal story in more depth is available to listeners as well. And Kelley, anything to add?
I would just like to bring it back to something Emily had said in the beginning about really creating a space for people to be their authentic selves as doctors and helping them integrate that into their clinical practice. The impact that it has on the patients, the children, the adolescents, the adults that we see, having a doctor that can be their authentic self and provide the best care is so important, but also the impact that it has on our doctors and our trainees. And for me to graduate someone from the program who is going to be a good psychiatrist, that's great. For us to graduate someone from our program who's going to be a good psychiatrist and a heavy psychiatrist and a well-adjusted psychiatrist can really, incorporate their lives and their clinical practice in a way that they can practice and help people for years and years. That's really what is most important. And I think that's really the message that I would want to send out to program directors, is we have this opportunity to create these spaces for people to be their best selves in whatever fashion that might be, and then become the best doctors they can be.
It's amazing. Thank you both for your incredible honesty and your insight and willingness to do this podcast. You also gave a brief, what we're calling conversations, that's recorded and will be available. Your work was part of the ACGME Docs with Disabilities Disability Resource Hub that was sponsored by the Macy Foundation. We're just grateful to have not only your talk, your conversation, your podcast episode, but also your paper, which will help people take all of the policy recommendations, all of the practice recommendations, and humanize it in a way, apply it, see how this has actually worked in practice. Your conversation today shows just how intentional and dedication to disability inclusion can really have successful outcomes. And Emily, I'm such a fan. I can see that Kelley is such a fan as well. But we know that having you in medicine is going to help not only, as you mentioned, those people that have concordant identities. So you had mentioned, these patients in your practice, especially those that are women or girls and those that are Black, to see the bigger potential, even with a diagnosis of ADHD or learning disabilities. And it's so powerful. And I know, Emily, I want people to go back and listen to your personal story, because it was a Black psychiatrist that was a massive part of your trajectory. And so I want them to hear that story directly from you. But thank you again. We're so grateful for your leadership and your willingness to share your story and just for all the advice that you've offered today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this special series of the Docs with Disabilities podcast, part of the Disability Resource Hub, made possible by the Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation Catalyst Award. We hope these conversations have sparked new ideas and deepened your commitment to advancing accessibility in graduate medical education. From the voices of residents and fellows to the insights of program directors and national leaders, one thing is clear. Access doesn't happen by accident. It's built intentionally, one conversation, one policy, and one program at a time. To continue learning, visit the full Disability Resource Hub in Learn at ACGME, linked in the show notes. Share it with your colleagues, your teams, and your trainees. Because when we build systems that work for disabled learners, we build better systems for everyone. Until next time, stay curious, stay committed, and keep doing the good work.